So as you know, I'm a Canadian and I sell primarily on Amazon.com. And I started selling on Amazon Canada in November of 2014 and expanded into .com in January of 2015. And within a few months of expanding to the States, I was making enough to cover my full-time living expenses. So the reason I expanded into the US and the reason I started the Facebook group, that we now have over 3,000 members, mostly Canadians by the way, is to help other people succeed on selling on Amazon. And so today I'm going to talk about some of the things you can do to expand into the US market. First and foremost, I do have an ebook available, How to Sell on Amazon.com from Canada. I wrote this book because so many people kept asking me the same questions, and it became a bit of a joke in our group back in January, February of 2016. People said, "Hey Duncan, you should write an ebook." And I was focused on selling on Amazon. I said, yeah, maybe I'll do something. And eventually I did come up with that ebook, and I've revised it several times since. It now includes how to do your own private label products, including almost 2 hours of video with that. So I've literally sold hundreds of copies of this book, and it's helped a lot of Canadians with questions that they had, and continues to sell well. But today in this video, I'm going to give you some of the basics so you can at least get started. First and foremost, when you open up an account, all accounts are unified on Amazon these days. When I opened my account back in 2014, I had to open a separate account for Canada and a separate account for .com in the US. That isn't the case anymore. The accounts are all unified. Your US.com account and .c Canada account are in fact two separate accounts, but they're unified under the same login, so it appears to be the same account, but in fact they are two very separate accounts. But nowadays it's a lot easier to link the two, so the first and foremost thing you're going to want to do is set both of them up, and you're going to need a bank account to sell on .com. And you can use a Canadian bank account when starting out. You do not need a US bank account. A lot of people think they need a US bank account right away. You don't. Later on, you will want to get a US bank account to save on some of the international exchange rate fees. But when you're just starting out, keep it simple. Get a business account if this is a business for you in Canada, and you can use that. Same with a credit card. They accept Canadian credit cards for setting up your Amazon account. So those two things you should get out of the way right off the bat. It'll ask you for information on the wizard when you're setting up the account as to what type of business you're running. So for most people, that's going to be a sole proprietorship, and they fill out a form that they keep on file for the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service in the US, called a W-8 And essentially what that states is that any taxes or income taxes owing on profits from things that you've sold on Amazon in the US, you will be declaring to the Canada Revenue Agency as a Canadian. So they don't need to withhold taxes for you in the US for the IRS's behalf, because you won't be paying anything in a lot of cases to the IRS. If you have a corporation, it could be a little more complex, but there's a separate form you would fill out along the same lines. As with anything, before you start selling in the US, if you have other businesses, or you think your situation might be different, or you're a US citizen as well as being a Canadian citizen, talk to a CPA, a trained accountant, maybe even a cross-border accountant, and just make sure that you are filling out the correct forms and not doing anything that could get you into hot water down the road. But for most Canadians, it's pretty cut and dry. So once you've filled out all that information, you've got an account set up. So the next question people ask is, how do I buy things in the US and get them to Amazon's warehouses in the US? And there's really two ways of doing that. One, you can buy products in Canada, prep them at your house, just like you're probably doing now for Amazon Canada, and then either drive them across the border yourself and have them picked up at a UPS or FedEx pickup location cross-border. Most of us live within a few minutes or within an hour of the nearest US border. So you can bring them across yourself. Now, it gets a little bit complicated at first, but it's easier than you might think. You just want to make sure you're doing the right things and you have the right paperwork. And that was one of the reasons I wrote the ebook. It goes into depth on how to drive your products across the border. For instance, you have to use the commercial truck crossing, so you're going to look kind of out of place. You're in a car in most cases, lined up with the semi-rigs, and the customs guys are probably going to think you're lost. But you do have to go through the commercial lane, and then you have to fill out the correct paperwork and the declared values. And my book includes examples of those forms. So when I was learning this, it was pretty complicated, and I got a lot of misinformation. I mean, all of this information I'm telling you and what's in my ebook, you can find it online, but literally there's so much confusion and conflicting information that when you're dealing with customs and import, you don't want to screw it up. So that was one of the reasons the book's been so successful. People want the facts. They don't want to second guess that the information they're learning turns out to be outdated or invalid. My book, I update regularly. It's all the latest information. So you can rest assured that when you follow the advice in there, you aren't going to get screwed over at the border or have your goods seized or maybe barred entry in the U.S. or something horrific, right? So don't take that chance. Now, there is an easier way of doing this, and I'd recommend you actually look into this as well. And that is, well, actually, there's two easy ways. One is use a cross-border service. So I live in Abbotsford, British Columbia, and there's a service here called Letterlock, and they charge a minimal fee to take my packages over the border into the U.S., where they get picked up by UPS or FedEx in the States and delivered on to Amazon's warehouses. So I don't have to deal with the borders at all. There's another company in Ontario called Stallion Express, and you can mail products directly to them or drop them off in person, and they'll do the same thing. Take your packages over the border, where they get picked up by UPS or FedEx, and onto Amazon US's warehouses. You would order products from your wholesalers in Canada or even from online retailers and send them to Stallion with your name on them. And then when the packages are received, they send you an email, you upload a manifest, and fill out some basic paperwork, and you're on your way. And again, they're really inexpensive. They even offer prep services, so if you need your goods consolidated into another box or labeled, they do all that for you. So I do most of my Canadian shipments go through Stallion or Letterlock these days. There's another company called Chit Chats Express that offer a similar service. They do require a bit more paperwork, though. And then there's Running Red in Manitoba, and they offer a service which is pretty much the same as the other guys, except Running Red will also bring, for limited clients, groceries across the border as well, with those prior notices of approval, which is more paperwork you need to know about. It's also in my ebook. So this isn't a pitch for the ebook. Hopefully it's a way to show people how to get started. But the reason that book exists is because there's really a lot of information you need to be aware of, and there are rules that you need to follow when you're importing products into the United States. You don't want to mess around with that. You might get away with something, or you might make a mistake. But one mistake, those guys aren't very forgiving, and that could be the end of your business. There's an easier way still, where you don't have to deal with any borders to sell in the U.S., and that is sourcing online at U.S. retailers. Some of them you can use a Canadian credit card, others are going to require a U.S. credit card. You can get a U.S. credit card as a Canadian. It really isn't that difficult to obtain, and I tell you about that in the ebook and where you can go to do that. Royal Bank offer one, so do BMO Harris if it's a business account. Then you have your product shipped to what's called a prep and ship company within the United States. And basically that's a warehouse where they will receive goods on your behalf, prepare them for Amazon, and then ship them to Amazon for you for a small fee. So you can source anywhere in the world and order products in the US and ship them to Amazon without ever seeing or touching inventory. And it's easier than you might think. So there's some really good ideas on how to get started selling in the U.S. There are other things to be aware of. There's a whole mess right now with should you collect state sales taxes in the U.S. For most Canadians, that's a discussion you can have with a CPA. A lot of people starting out are not. The cost of compliance for them is very high. But talk to a CPA on that and get their opinion. But don't let the bureaucracy hold you back. You know, it's not as complicated. It doesn't have to be as complicated as you might think when you start reading into some of the rules and regulations. But certainly with the import requirements, you've got to make sure you're complying with that, and use a service if you can to get your products across the border, or like I said, order within the United States and have it shipped to a prep company. Now, one way you can source for a ton of profitable inventory on US retailers' websites that you can resell on Amazon is using software called Tactical Arbitrage. And it's all web-based. It's a monthly subscription, and it basically scours tons and tons of different sites. You can even add custom sites that they haven't added to their own database. And it scrapes their sites and it compares products for sale on a retailer's website to what's selling on Amazon. And you can do it from Canadian stores to Amazon US, or Canadian stores to Amazon Canada too. It works in both. It even works in the UK and Japan. And it automates your sourcing for you. So I use the software, and I'm literally making thousands of dollars a month profit running this software in the background. It's a set it and forget it. There's some filters and some requirements I set up ahead of time. And I go back within a few hours or sometimes a day later, and I have a list of products that I can purchase and resell on Amazon for a profit that meet my criteria. So I don't even need to hire a virtual assistant to do it for me. The software does it all. So it's one of the easiest ways to get started and build some capital on Amazon, especially during Q4 when wholesalers are busy or deliveries aren't going to make it on time. There's a lot of stuff you can buy from retailers that you can make a ton of profit on during Q4 and get it into Amazon very quickly. So if you sign up for Tactical Arbitrage, I have a special code for you. It's called, you just enter in my first name, Duncan, with the number 10 after it, Duncan10, and you will get a 10-day trial for just $1. Normally they only offer you a 7-day trial. With that code, you get a 10-day trial. So check it out. Don't buy any software until you're ready to start using it. There's plenty of YouTube videos online showing how to use Tactical Arbitrage. So maybe get familiar with it and then do your 10-day trial and then start your subscription. But all of those things should be really useful to you to start your journey selling on Amazon.com from Canada. And believe me, once you start selling in the US and getting paid in US dollars while living in Canada, you'll never look back. It's a great time to make US dollars living in Canada. So good luck, and leave comments below. Be sure to check out our Facebook group. We have over 3,000 members now, mostly Canadians, and we're growing rapidly. People in the group are super helpful. If you have a question, you can ask there, and you'll get like 6 answers back. There are no such thing as dumb questions in the group. We have moderators and myself making sure we don't get any bullying or negative behavior. We quickly boot out people like that. And we're all here to help each other. So thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and like this video. And I look forward to giving you further updates.